Hello, everybody. It is a second podcast today because I felt like it's that important to bring some of this information separately. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully, I can get through this in a timely fashion. Slowly at first, and then all of a sudden. Please remember this phrase. You know, most would have thought that the red flag legislation was the next step in significantly eliminating the Second Amendment, and it still may very well be. But our First Amendment is in critical condition right now, and that's not an overstatement. Our First Amendment is being stabbed like Brutus to Caesar in the back by our government, our elected officials, our unelected officials, and by the citizenry of America standing by and not saying, stop. You have to stop trampling on our First Amendment rights. Now, I believe that from the conception of our country, it's been a good versus evil concept. If you remember, we had a revolution, but our first form of government was the Articles of Confederation. It was a constitutional. Hold on. Let me restate this. We had a form of government after the revolution that did not work. So we had a constitutional convention where Jefferson is really credited with the majority of the Constitution, and we started with the United States of America as we understand it under the Constitution governance. So at that time, I really believe that the people that are used to being in power, elite classes, said, you know what, that's okay. Over time, we can win this back. And I'll give you an example. The War of 1812, Britain trying to take back control of this continent is an example of that. And obviously, they failed, thankfully. But what we are experiencing today, our willingness to ask the government to do more, is very humbling for me. What we are experiencing today will pass. I've said this before. I believe God is in control. I do respect this virus, but I do not fear it, and I am not willing to give up my liberties in order for a perceived safety, a perceived protection. Every one of us is going to die at some point. All of the things that they told us about how bad this was going to be didn't end up being the case, and yet we believed it. We were willing to lay down basic liberties, the First Amendment. I look at it like this, that these are birth pains right now that we're going through. This isn't going to be what eliminates the human existence. This is not God coming back today. But there are things happening that are suggesting we're getting closer to a lot of the end of the world Armageddon type stuff. These birth pains that we're experiencing right now from the citizenry of the United States of America this is getting us conditioned, and it is being evaluated by the elected and unelected policymakers for the next crisis, and when and how they can take more liberties away. This is hopefully going to be released, or these restrictions are going to be released from us at this point. But I think that there's a lot more at play right now. And I want to share with you from Brian Maher, Dan Denning, and Mike Adams. And this is quote, and these are segments from articles. And what about the 60% of Americans who do not own stocks? These are the same Americans who may be presently jobless. The same Americans who will soon be unable to meet rents and mortgages. The same Americans who are suddenly forced upon short rations. And let me just inject right now. The rest of this article was talking about 40% of Americans own stock, 60% of Americans don't. We've never had a wealth separation so great. We've never had the haves and the have-nots be such a large, cavernous, seemingly unreachable. In this country, you could do anything you wanted to. You can succeed. You have the opportunities to succeed more so than any other country on the planet. And yet these differences are becoming so much more obvious. He goes on to say, while these Americans benefit from the Federal Reserve's false fireworks, will they? Will the 60% of people that don't own stocks really benefit from what's supposed to be this great stimulus plan, the CARE Act, the $2.2 trillion that's going to turn into $12 trillion is printed and dispersed? Will we ever see this money? Back to the article. It would appear unlikely that we will. Wealth inequalities already ran to extremes this past decade of stock market manipulation. They may only deepen in the times ahead. And then he quotes H.L. Mencken. And H.L. Mencken has been quoted by Dan Denning, Bill Bonner. H.L. Mencken, quote, every normal man must be tempted at times to spit on his hands, hoist the black flag, and begin slitting throats, end quote. The article says, we suspect that many Americans will soon sense that very temptation bubbling within. What is more, they may just indulge in it. End of the article. I believe in nonviolent public participation in gatherings, and we have the ability to be able to use the internet to be able to make sure that we communicate, that we are unhappy with what's happening with our governance body. So the slitting of the throats by H.L. Mencken is somewhat figurative and suggests that it could become literal. I noted earlier in a CWC meeting back in 2019, in the end of 2019, that Chile was considered the most stable civilized governance in South America. And yet they were rioting and deaths in the street over a proposed tax hike. And it seemed to just happen at night. Again, slowly at first, and then all of a sudden. We in this country are closer to the edge than we want to admit, because we are being lied to. The facts are not as they suggest that they are. Next. The human tragedy from the virus, the deaths and massive economic dislocation, depression, and contraction is not the only long-term consequence. The First Amendment to the Bill of Rights may not survive the slow-motion march to martial law. Think about this. There are 5 freedoms in the First Amendment. Number 1, freedom of speech. Number 2, freedom of religion. Number 3, freedom of assembly. Number 4, freedom of the press. Number 5, the right to petition your government for a redress of your grievances. Each one of these, now you can say it's because of the CCP virus, and I will use that, the Chinese Communist Party virus. The majority of the information suggests that that's probably the blame we can place it on. Even if they didn't create it, it was their inaction, their decision to cover up that caused this to be a global pandemic instead of a regional outbreak. So I'm going to refer to it as the CCP virus, because of that's simply, as I mentioned yesterday with the snowflake and the avalanche, that's simply the one triggering mechanism that exposes an underlying problem. And that is that we are so easily willingly to give up our liberties. The First Amendment is under attack, And we do not have enough people, enough citizens of Michigan, enough citizens of the United States saying, again, no, I'm calling for nonviolent civil disobedience, nonviolent. So this article by Dan Denning goes on to say, I always thought that the power-seeking psychopaths from big government would come after the Second Amendment first. I mentioned that because the idea would be if the citizenry still has the ability to defend themselves. I'm not talking about automatic weapons. I'm not talking about tanks. I'm not talking about drones with missiles. I'm talking about the ability to be able to defend your person, your home, your family, your property. It's more difficult for these martial law mass takeovers to happen by government, but we're already showing a willingness to step aside. So he thought that the Second Amendment as well. And with the proliferation of the red flag laws passed last year, these laws would allow your neighbor to inform on you to the cops, have you designated as a dangerous person, have your gun confiscated. Okay, that is concerning. It really is. Because if you have Randy Weaver can speak to this point where a neighbor said something and then his family gets killed. And that's an example that it just takes somebody to say the wrong thing about you. It doesn't have to be the truth. And we see lies around us all the time. Dan goes on to say, but that's not the greatest danger to individual liberty right now. The greatest danger is that in the space of a few short weeks, remember, slowly at first, then all of a sudden, in the space of a few short weeks, we've gone from a nominally federal system with limited government and the rule of law to a complete trashing of our rights at almost every level of government. And to be honest, it appears most Americans have embraced it. It is sad. I'm not embracing it. I'm asking for more people to continue this conversation. And we need to make sure that we are a voice sharing with each other what the facts are, not dramatizing things. And I'm trying not to do that. I do get upset sometimes. But here's another example about how our rights are being suppressed. So Mike Adams talks about how it is truthful free speech is being suppressed. And it simply states, because if you look at the FDA, and if you take a look at the FDA and the FTC and the power to supersede the First Amendment regarding speech about nutritional supplements, if they are truthful, then why are they illegal under FDA rules? Which the FDA rules are self-written and are subject to no oversight by Congress or by the voters. So when I have a discussion about, this leads to when I have a discussion with a family member about whether or not I'm going to trust in a pandemic Fauci or the president, a scientist or a real estate businessman who is now our president, I'm going to take the real estate businessman who is now our president. I'm going to take the guy who looks at this and says, wait a minute, maybe that's not the case. Maybe that's not how the disease needs to be treated. Maybe that's not how many people are going to die. Maybe we need more testing. Maybe we don't need more ventilators. Maybe we need to eliminate some regulation, some bureaucratic oversight. Maybe we need to eliminate it. So Mike Adams actually gets into, and he's talking about, remember that the FDA still claims that there is no such thing as a vitamin, mineral, food, or nutrient that can prevent or cure any diseases. Think about that. Why? Because all of those things are not big pharma. All of those things are not backed by big pharma and part of the money generating system. He says that's absurd when we all know, for example, that scurvy is a disease of vitamin C deficiency and can be cured with vitamin C. Similarly, a disease known as rickets is caused by a vitamin D deficiency and can be cured with vitamin D. And yet such claims are never allowed to be made by those who are marketing such nutritional solutions alongside those truthful claims. So, as we have repeatedly pointed out, nothing has yet been clinically tested to treat, prevent, or cure the coronavirus, the COVID-19, infections, or any of things that they're talking about right now. No drugs, no vaccines, no herbs, no molecules, no substances, etc. There are many promising candidates for such treatments, including hydroxychloroquine, zinc, various vitamins, which is why we've called for urgent studies and clinical trials to be conducted so that we can all find out what works. But so far, nothing has actually been tested or proven to work. And yet, to this day, virtually the entire medical industry and pharma-funded corporate media routinely claim a coronavirus vaccine will be a cure, even though there's no evidence of that. So, no clinical trials have been conducted whatsoever. They're starting to, but if you watch like CNN, so despite the lack of a single shred of evidence to support these claims, CNN, which is largely funded by Big Pharma and therefore has direct financial ties to the vaccine industry, hasn't received a single warning from the FDA or the FTC to stop making unproven marketing claims about a future coronavirus vaccine. We can have hope, but you can't say it's going to happen. And you certainly can't say put academia on there, the doctors saying, well, we need to keep the economy closed for at least a year to 18 months before we can even have a vaccine. There's no guarantee. There are many vaccines we've attempted to create that we still can't because too many lab animals die. We can't get it out of the lab yet. Now, Dr. Fauci and Bill Gates, neither one of them have received warnings for telling the people that there's going to be a vaccine. They don't know there's going to be a vaccine. We can hope that our system will produce one, but they're talking as if there's going to be one, and yet they do not receive these warnings to stop. The fact is, no vaccine actually exists. So when we talk about when there is a vaccine, that there will be a vaccine, or they do not, the elite class, they do not get the stop, cease and desist letters. But if I or Mike Adams or somebody else that's considered conspiratorial lunatic and suggests that there are holistic aspects to being able to treat this virus, we would be told we cannot advertise that. That I'm lying, I'm disinformation. Mainstream media tells you do not watch the internet. Look to them for the truth, and yet they lie consistently. The truth is, both the FDA and the FTC have no limits on the wild quack science claims that are routinely made about vaccines. Even when such vaccine efforts rake in billions of dollars in grant money and retail profits, vaccines are never subjected to the same regulatory scrutiny as vitamin C, even though vitamin C is a safe, natural substance, while vaccines are artificial concoctions laced with neurotoxins such as MSG, formaldehyde, aluminum, and even mercury in certain cases. When it comes to scientific evidence supporting nutritional supplements, there will never be large-scale clinical trials of vitamins, minerals, or natural substances such as silver, since those products don't enrich big pharma drug cartels that essentially control the FDA. The FDA is not a neutral party in all this. They represent the financial interests of the pharmaceutical industry, and they deliberately set very high financial barriers for clinical trials that prohibit smaller companies from being able to fund them. And I've said it before, they've lied so often because it does not benefit them and a group. Seriously, if the FDA really wanted to protect the public from dangerous products, it would ban statin drugs or halt the use of dangerous levels of aluminum and mercury in vaccines, especially those given to children. Instead, the priorities of the agency focus on harassing far smaller companies that are selling safe, natural substances that have a long track record of efficacious use. Can silver products treat or prevent COVID-19? We don't know. But I've thought for a long time that a colloidal silver or a silver infused fabric with a carbon filtration fabric enclosed in something that's stylish. I see Louis Vuitton now has stylish and designer masks to start wearing. Of course, if you're in that class and you want to spend hundreds of dollars on a scarf or on a facial covering, that's fine. But I think a shelf life mask that can be washed and provides us with protection over the course of a 5 to 7 year period before we buy a new one, I'd spend $100 on that. I'd spend $100 on a hunting outfit. We have them, and it has carbon filtration. We do not have to go out and reinvent and throw billions of dollars of taxpayer money into trying to figure out what works. We already know it works. Those of us that have hunted and used a carbon lined hunting to keep our scent locked in, well, these are some of the same principles we can use to create masks. It's already there. We just have to use our minds, use our brains. The real problem with fraudulent marketing claims in this country is found in how Big Pharma bankrolls the mainstream media with false and misleading drug ads. And you can bet neither the FDA or the FTC will ever open investigations into that massive fraud. That's Mike Adams summing it all up. Sometimes I think Mike Adams is way out there, but I share some of his stuff because I'm more convinced than ever that slowly at first and then all of a sudden, the United States of America is going to wake up one day. And I hope that we can reverse this course before it takes a physical conflict. And that's why I'm trying to proceed with having this conversation as much as possible. I am fighting this erosion of our liberties in an attempt to expand the real conversation because I want my kids and my grandkids to experience liberty such as I have, and to get back to what our founding fathers established as the greatest of all time, most prosperous and generous nation, governance ever known to the existence of Earth. I'm going to end today asking you to be aware that there is a CWC podcast. We've done one episode, and we look forward to trying to do a couple a week. Hopefully having the discussions such as this you'll tune into. Also want you to be aware of that in the state of Michigan, we have a Facebook effort. I'm not on Facebook, but I know people that are, and there's a Facebook effort to stop the excessive overreach of government petition. I think there was a couple 100,000 had already signed up. And I think it was somebody from Mattawan. Great work out there, by the way. And then also I wanted you to be aware of that there's an online petition for the recall of the governor of Michigan. And you can make that decision whether or not you think that's a good move, but I wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. Listen, I'm going to keep trying to read as much as I can and continue this conversation so that we can try to get back to the basics here and inform my fellow citizens, and hopefully my fellow citizens can continue to throw things my way so that I can look into it. I know that God is blessing America in ways that we don't even know. I also know that God is in control. This is all part of His plan. I just want to make sure that I am being responsible with the gifts that God has blessed me with and be as much of a responsible citizen as I can. I'm looking forward to the next time we get a chance to share. I'm James Detroit, and I'm out.